mean, I think the best place to start is where Audrey left us, which is this idea of the new, because we have clearly done a thing in both of our works where, it's a bold choice. It elicits some questions. I know why I chose the word new.
We found our brands.
We found our brand,
Or
although
brand,
I guess I gotta keep it going. But I know why I chose that word for my work. What does it represent for this project? And because essentially it sets up the whole thesis of your book. So can you explain that, the new?
Sure. First of all, thank you all for being here. Thanks to everyone on Zoom. Hopefully we'll have some fun. All the new things. So, I mean, it's a joke, but it's not a joke. It is sort of the brand, like New California wine, new wine rules, new French wine. The next one will be coming soon, hopefully. We'll talk about that later.
Scoop.
But I mean, some of it is just, as a journalist, you think about news value, you think about what is actually worthy of writing a significant project about. And so that sort of defines, for me, what the way that you create a scope for a very big thing. But with wine, I mean, part of it is like with wine, people are sort of like, oh, like, let's do a book on Chianti. Let's do a book on, I don't know, Rioja. Like, I mean, a lot of the same ground gets trod. That's never been my thing. And I think for my own curiosity and, sort of intellectual need, I always am looking for what is different. But when it came to France, I think it's interesting. It started as very much the new in France, at least in wine, is going to be very much on the fringe. It's going to be all kind of weird little projects, natural wines, funky stuff, sort of off. I'll be hanging out in the Auvergne, doing my thing. And what became very clear, and you and I have talked about this a lot, is that what was happening was huge and transformative and very much a mirror of the fact that France was and is becoming a new place. And so even compared to sort of, my going back to the same word over and over again, I think this project, it became immediately, maybe not immediately clear, it became clear that in order to tell the story of the new French wine, I was going to have to tell the story of the new French everything else-ish, which you have done as well.
But it's interesting because new does not suggest that somehow you lose the past, but you really need to understand and examine the past to be able to follow the shift and see how really, the evolutions are happening. And obviously that goes towards something else I really want to talk about. And people should know also, this is a 2-volume book. It has narrative in one book and an entire chronicling of the producers in another. So this is not by any means, lightly researched or lightly explored. I mean, ever since I've known Jon, he's been working on this book, and we'll get into that too. But so you draw on something that I think is very important, and I have been very driven by as well in my work, which is this recurring theme of myth versus reality, both not only for the country, but wine culture. And there was a New York Times story that came out this morning that you and I were talking about, or texting with a bit of frustration about, that basically could have felt like it was written in the 1940s, which was essentially that Paris is so inspiring. What was it? It was like the artistic.
It was sort of a traveler's guide to the places you could go in Paris that had inspired famous artists. So Picasso used to get drunk here, and now you should get drunk here.
Right. Yeah. Hemingway did this here, except we've seen that about 7 billion times. And it was presented as though it was new, and it's sort of a regurgitation of everything that is, old and entrenched in this romantic history. So it seemed like a very timely example of, what we see happen over and over again. So why can you examine, or can you talk about why you examined this idea of the myth and what that means in terms of wine?
And everything else, honestly. So it's interesting. There's two parts to kind of the myth of France. There is the part that that is an externality. There's a part that Americans and the rest of the world sort of bathe themselves in and admire, and you know, that inspires and makes them buy lots of L'Occitane and lavender sachets and all the things. So, but there's also an enormous part of it that is that there is the myth of France that the French also believe in and that they also perpetuate. And those two are completely symbiotic, which is to say that the French have a very, very clear view of how they think the past has come to bring them to this moment. And they sort of bathe, I mean, you look everywhere, they bathe in history, or a very specific telling of history. And it is a strong national myth. And I apologize if I'm diving farther into your questions, but I mean, the chapter of the first the title of the first chapter, which is Patrimoine, or What's Old is New Again, is very much in terms of this idea of patrimoine. And it doesn't, I mean, it's history kind of, it's patrimony kind of, but it doesn't actually really translate in the sense that
The word itself, you mean,
the word itself,
yeah.
that there's not this in I think the Anglophone world, there's not this fixation on the kind of moral tie to the past, whether real or fictional. And so myth became very important in terms of identifying sort of how the French view their own world, and specific to wine, and the ways in which the famous wines of France, the famous appellations of France are, you know, they are built on quality, they are built on terroir, they are built on, you know, on the extraordinary discovery of how good a thing tastes from this place. But at the same time, they are very much kind of convenient half truths in their way. And literally, if you look at the way that an appellation law is written, the cahier des charges, so this is like the INAO approves it, it goes into French legislative text. It is officially encapsulated in law. The history of every appellation, not just for wine, for any appellation contrôlée, is written into French law. So whatever the official trade group decides is their history, it is codified. And that is, you know, that is not something that happens anywhere else in the world.
So no other wine region.
No, I mean, they have very specific production standards, but this storytelling aspect is just not, it's not baked into the culture in the same way. And so one of the things that I found kept recurring as I was going from region to region was scraping away at the official story, and finding that that everything, to use the favorite French word of all time, everything is compliqué. Everything is more complicated than it would appear, and that there are many different sides to the story, that these things that we take as eternal truths in wine, that
Such as?
I mean, you know, pick any appellation, pick your favorite appellation, pick your favorite wine. Like, you know, is it Gevrey Chambertin? Is it Cahors? Is it Montlouis? Like, maybe you could trace some semblance of a history back to, let's say, the, I don't know, Second Republic, if you really tried. But on balance, like, the wines as they exist today, or even as they existed when the appellations were created, which again didn't start till 1936, really doesn't resemble the larger history of these places. And so when the powers that be in one place or another get upset that there's troublemakers who want to seek the new, in fact, what was true over and over again was that these quote unquote new things were simply iterations of wines or grape growing or techniques or culture that had existed in the past. And so again, this sense of patrimoine, where, you know, everything in the present is connected to the past, was in fact totally true. It just, half of it was true and half of it was myth.
Wow. You definitely did.
I'm sorry, that was a very, very elaborate.
No, but you this connects perfectly to what I wanted to talk to you about too, which was the issue of the appellations, right? Because this is quite unique, as you've said, but it's also a system that's quite difficult for young, not even necessarily young, but just winemakers who want to do things a bit differently, notably natural winemakers. It's very difficult for them to navigate in this system. how does that play out, in practice for winemakers like that? And also, I think you also talk about how there's been an attempt to have another set of rules for natural winemaking, which is also complicated because by definition, it's supposed to be sort of free from all these rules.
So yes, although it very much depends on where you are, which is to say, so the appellation contrôlée system, again, is very formalized, and the way that it was constructed, and it was constructed really over a 30-year period. There were about 6 successive laws, and it wasn't constructed for some grand noble idea of what the patrimoine of wine was. It was created as an anti-fraud mechanism, because in the years both during but after phylloxera, which was the grape louse that really destroyed a lot of the French vineyards, there was, everywhere in wine producing France, there was rampant fraud. So maybe you would find grapes from elsewhere, maybe you would bring them from Algeria or somewhere else in the colonies, maybe you would just mix up some prune juice and some spices and whatever else. Or so the appellations were literally started as a method of saying, we want you to make wine, like actual wine, kind of from the place that you're in. Like if you're in Champagne, you should make Champagne. Except even then, again, that's why it took so many different rounds. They didn't say you have to use grapes from here. It was like, well, you actually have to, that eventually they got to that. Then they were like, well, you have to use certain grapes. Then they were like, you can only produce a certain number. And so this started in 1907 and it went to 1936. So the creation of the appellation system, now we see it as this great preservation tool for tradition, but it was a way to get farmers to stop committing fraud. Not just farmers, like negos, like anyone who was in the wine trade, to stop committing fraud. So the way it works today is that appellations are governed by their ODG, their Office Direction Générale, I think. So that's the syndicate that controls each appellation, and then the INAO, which is the governing body, the governmental body that oversees it all. They're sort of there to sign off on what the ODGs, what the syndicats believe they want in terms of rules. They kind of govern it. They approve whether a new appellation gets created, etc. But it's very much built around local control. This very long chapter that goes into why the courts had to get involved, and the guy who created the Chateauneuf appellation and syndicat basically sued his way successively through numerous lawsuits up to the Cour de Cassation, which is the Supreme Court. And
we're always told that France is not litigious.
Point simply being that the way the appellations function is very, very bureaucratic. What could possibly go wrong if you're a young winemaker and you have a bunch of guys who've been in the appellation for 40 years who have a very specific way they want to farm. They love their Roundup. They don't want to, they this crazy organics thing. I'm being extreme, but there is a very formal and very codified and somewhat calcified system in place to ensure that the appellations, quote unquote, protect themselves.
But then how does the new, go ahead.
Yep. Sorry. So what has happened over and over is that, natural wine in particular, but it doesn't even necessarily have to be natural. It's new people who come in. They don't necessarily have local connections. They are from a different generation. Maybe they want to make natural wine, and the wine is a little different than the appellations are used to. And the thing to remember is that most appellations have a tasting committee. And this is something, interestingly, that Jacques Chirac signed off on in, I think, 1974 as one of the additions to the appellation laws, is that everyone who wanted to win the agrément, like the approval to have an appellation wine, had to put their wine before a tasting committee. Now, who's on the tasting committee?
That was going to be my next question.
So you got a bunch of guys who like they like how Sancerre's tasted with their, their added yeasts and their this and their that and their high yields, and something comes along that's a little different. Or maybe, I don't know, like, you like your truck hit one of their vines, or maybe you weren't nice to them at the boulangerie, or, like
So a bit of a mafia.
Yeah, you built your wall too high, whatever it is. So I mean, there's a lot of pettiness in the appellation system as it's set up in some places. In some places you see it works very well. But it was interesting when I was doing research. I thought, again, the things I thought I knew when I started, I thought that all these like natural winemakers who were moving their wine into Vin de France. So that's when you take what is theoretically the lowest possible designation for your wine. And Vin de France is supposed to be complete crap.
Like table wine, right?
It's table wine. Yeah, it used to be Vin de Table. Now it's Vin de France because the EU. So at least it's French crap instead of Spanish crap. But they did it not because they were making a statement. Typically, they were heartbroken at having to leave appellations. It was that their wines were rejected too many times, or they were kicked out, or and the thing to remember is each time typically that you submit your wine, you have to pay a fee. So they would see over and over again that they would submit their wine 3 times, and maybe they would get it on the 3rd time, and maybe they wouldn't get it at all. And it wasn't like huge. It was like, I don't know, 100 euros a time, but you're just like, these aren't people with a ton of money. And you're like, this, to your point, this starts to feel kind of like a racket.
Yeah, absolutely. So this all is happening. All of the changes that you were uncovering happens really in lockstep with the changes and the changing socioeconomic realities across France. I mean, you literally, every time I would talk to you, you'd be like, I'm driving through Orange, I'm driving through, some region, and I know you were researching during the Gilets jaunes protests, right? So I remember you telling me, they're there at the roundabout here. So you saw over the many years, and we'll talk about that too, the many years that you were researching this book, a lot of broad shifts. So can you, to what extent did that play a role in all of this research? And can you highlight maybe some of these shifts that had the most impact, you think, on the wine production, or at least as a mirror to what was happening in wine?
So the Gilets jaunes, which is the sort of the backbone of the Languedoc chapter, is what we used to call in newspapers good copy. That was a mess, but it was good for my narrative, I guess, in the sense that the Languedoc is a hot mess and the Gilets jaunes were a hot mess, and they were expressing themselves very visibly in their barbecues at the roundabouts, and like taking down the Vinci toll booths and whatever. So it became really clear at some point that what was happening in each of these regions was in some way a reflection of the economic and cultural changes in those regions, sometimes for the good, sometimes for the bad. Languedoc and the Gilets jaunes being a good example. The bourgeoisie and the Chinese investors and the banks and insurance companies in the Medoc being another, where we started the Bordeaux chapter this way, and finally it felt like it was just too much of a downer. But one of the most poignant moments for me in the course of traveling was I was in Pauillac. Pauillac is where Chateau Latour, Chateau Lafite Rothschild, Chateau Mouton Rothschild, most of the first growths in Bordeaux are. And Pauillac is kind of a bummer of a town. I
was there over the summer briefly. I saw that.
Yeah. Its poverty rate is 50% higher than the national average. They're finally starting to renovate some of the downtown and the port, but it's at best you could call it a working class town. But I was at the Intermarché getting gas, and there were a bunch of dudes who were kind of rough trade around. I was I grew up in New York. There's not a lot of things that scare me, but I actually while I was out pumping the gas, I locked my car door. I was they may get me, but they're not getting my notebook. But I was just this is insane. This is 600 meters from Chateau Lafite. How does that
great
happen?
wealth?
Yeah.
Great wealth.
I mean, and what
history.
became clear was like none of the wealth was trickling down. For the most part, the crew class A have all gotten tax exemptions because they're job creators. So this. I mean, we're not talking about like out in the Cantal or Corrèze, like the real hard scrabble France profonde. We're talking about Pauillac. Like this is 40 minutes from Bordeaux, which is a prosperous city. This is a place that has the most sort of created wealth of any wine town anywhere. And it's kind of a crappy place. It's like
and so how does that reflect the wine making that was happening?
Well, I mean, what became clear was like that was emblematic of how difficult it is to have change in the Medoc, and how like Margaux was in fact doing much better at its progressive values than Pauillac. I mean, just about next appellation down, because there was a cultural shift. The flip side being, you take somewhere like the Pays Nantais, right around Nantes, where Nantes, I did not expect to be what it was, which is this very young, prosperous city,
very green,
very culturally progressive, and you see how not just Muscadet, which is the kind of best known local wine, but the Côte d'Anceny, like all of the wine regions around, but Muscadet in particular, is going through this tremendous progressive revolution that very much reflects the way that Nantes is a city, and the people in Nantes are supporting their local produce, and they see the need for great French wines to evolve. And again, you have this local, this local support, great neo bistros, young chefs, like a culture of France that is very 21st century, that is less homogeneous, that is less sort of middle-aged and white, that is moving.
Yeah.
And same thing in some way with Lyon and Beaujolais. Or frankly, Beaune in Burgundy.
I was just going to ask you about Burgundy, because obviously Burgundy has always been a favorite wine region for a lot of American wine drinkers, I think. But kind of that seems to me.
Yes and no. It's
no,
I mean, like,
because it seems to me there are a lot of international winemakers who have set up there.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Burgundy is, for a long time, at least for Americans, it was considered like too complicated to understand, and there was just the Burgundians didn't really engage with international trade aside from the big
negotiating. Don't like to open their doors to visitors.
Well, now for a different reason. It used to be because they were like farmers who had no money and had like maybe been to the like 2 local villages, but had no idea what was going on in the world. Now it's because they're so well known and so revered that like they have no wine to pour for anyone. But I guess same net effect, but very different reasons. But no, I mean, it is interesting that the part of Burgundy that's hard is the prices have become ridiculous, and even now, I mean, the Burgundians are more aware of this than anyone, and they're frustrated because they understand that if they don't find a way for a new generation to actually drink Burgundy at some level, then everyone will move on, and that the people who have made the wines that expensive, which are who they call the collectionneur, the collectors, not the amateur, like the real fans, they're not loyal customers. Like that's not a sustainable market. And it's interesting, I just got back from there last night. Every single person in Burgundy you talk to, they're very clear that they have a moral responsibility to be making more affordable, like basic wine. You could be in Vosne Romanée, you could be in the Côte de Couchois, wherever. Like it is this understanding that like a wine region succeeds because people can drink it all the time. And when you go to Beaune, you see the same thing. It is very international. It is surprisingly open for a wine region that was not historically kind of open and welcoming. Like, there's great food, there's great third wave coffee. Like it's very engaged with the outside world. And I mean, not just throughout France, but like, Singapore and Tokyo and Argentina.
And those are the people who are coming and trying to buy.
Yeah. With some success, or in some cases, those are the people who are coming to Burgundy and establishing themselves and starting to make wine. And the fact that you can show up as someone with no land, with no pedigree, with no sort of history, and within a few years, at the very least, become a micronegos, like, sort of buy grapes in different places and make a little bit of wine, and then eventually, hopefully, like find a little plot of your own. Like this place that was considered sort of the most closed and literally cloistered and monastic and mysterious of wine regions, like it's astonishing how welcoming they are to anyone today who wants to come and try their hand at doing a thing.
So that's quite a big shift, obviously. I mean, you've already named a few shifts across France. Obviously, there are plenty we could keep talking about that are.
We'll just go region by region. So
How much time you're going to skip dinner, right? I mentioned earlier that you have been working on this for a very long time. It's been like 9 years.
Yep.
I don't know if I think you'll probably be able to detect that when you see it and you hold it in your hands and you start reading the different sections. But this is just how did you do this? Like what? Truly, because I mean, I've researched, complicated projects before, but this just seems like I would just run scared and be like, take the advance money back. I can't do this. So what was your process?
Well, there were, at least a dozen times when I was like, so what did I get paid as in advance? And like, how bad would my life be if I just sent them back a check? Like went even deeper into debt. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, probably by being too stupid to have said no in the first place.
Well, I should preface this by saying you live part-time in Paris.
Yes.
Like, so you come back and forth, you've been building.
But I didn't when I started this book.
No, but you were already coming. This isn't like a new, place of research for you. So I guess the better question is, how did you organize the research once you had decided that you were too far in and you were going to produce this thing? How did you organize yourself?
You've also in your question answered why I'm not writing the new Italian one. Except like, oh, what are you going to do next? I'm like, I'm not going to a place that I don't know and doing another thing like this, because that would be even stupider. How did I organize? So again, I thought this was going to be like a 2-year project. And this literally started because I had just done the New California. It was 2014. My editor at 10 Speed, Emily, we went out for drinks, for wine at a natural wine bar in Oakland. So never agree to do anything at a natural wine bar in Oakland. That is my takeaway.
Well, I have loads of other questions about that.
But so
later.
Probably one or two too many glasses of unsulfured Gamay in. And we're talking about like what should I do next, et cetera. And she's like, what about France? And I was like, yeah, that's a great idea. And so we talked about it. I was like, this is, again, like we'll look at the fringe and there's lots of cool stuff around the edges, and like a couple of years, bang it out. It'll be really fascinating. It'll be a chance to go see some parts of France. But what became really clear after a couple of 3 trips was that that there was an enormous amount to process, that I was going to have to go everywhere. So in terms of process, like the literal process, this is going to be the most unromantic answer ever. Like I built a database. I literally built like a Google form that I could just start putting lots of information into, and just copiously gathered notes and thoughts and ideas and started planning trips. Very quickly, learn some lessons about logistics, like make a map before you start booking appointments, because you think you know where places are, but like this was after the Jura, and I was like, yeah, it's a tiny little wine region, just I'll book stuff whenever I can see people, and it's fine. Like I understand the French is very particular about appointments, and after like literally between every appointment I would be driving 40 minutes, and I was like, screw this. So yeah,
oops.
You you make a map and you start thinking, okay, this day is my this day is my Morgon day. This day is my like Sud Beaujolais day. This day is, whatever. And you or I,
Yeah, I'm not doing this
yeah,
project.
yeah.
Yeah.
Come on, it's only 2 years, easy.
2 years.
But I started to get a little bit more organized. But honestly, I would have to do about 5 to 6 weeks of research for every 3-week trip.
Wait, say that again.
I would have to do about 5 to 6 weeks research for every 3-week trip.
I mean, when you see the book again, you will not be surprised by that information, but it's true that taking that, and also it's funny, you talk about a 2 year, like bang out a book in 2 years. It's still very complicated. I mean, I find it's like my body was like broken after both of these experiences. So I don't know how you maintained your self and, through 9 years of this, but you really were committed.
Yeah, aside from the like 40,000 times I was just, again, like, I'm done. But honestly, some of it became, who gets, in a very real way, who gets the experience that I got, who gets to go see that many parts of France, who I think I counted, the course of this, I visited 72 departments. And who gets to see all these places, who gets to like spend this much time with people who are like out there doing the real work.
Yeah.
And I mean, lots of like long nights and Airbnbs and whatever. I mean, it was a lot, but at the same time, you're just like, I would remind myself over and over again, like, who gets this experience? I get to do this thing and see this thing that like no one gets. I mean, I think even people who write sort of the grand treatises about this is what's happening in France now, like, maybe they go to a few regions, but or a few departments, but like, it just, I mean, the scope of it was completely insane, but at the same time, it was also like, I will never have this chance again in my life to get to cover this much ground, but B, like, this is, if you really truly love France, if you love French culture, if you love French gastronomy, French wine, any of it, like, this is, I mean, it's ridiculous to say it's a once in a lifetime opportunity, but it's just like, this was like getting to the meat of it. And so, yes, it was completely too much. But on the other hand, it was me satisfying this huge curiosity.
Right. Well, and so Eric Asimov of the New York Times featured the book this summer. And one of the things he said at the end of his review was he was very curious to see if he would see, obviously, or if any of us will see what the French have to say about this book. And it is not currently in French. I don't know if that is in the works. I mean, it would probably cost them so much money to translate this book, but
when I win the lottery.
Right. But have you had feedback from French wine writers or French producers who, grasp what you have attempted to do?
Very modestly. I'm not expecting French wine writers to love it, because it would be very much in the French ethos to neg in the way that only the French can neg someone who actually had like done the work they hadn't done. And it is interesting that one of the main complaints that, and I think it's got a little better, one of the main complaints that vignerons have about the French wine press is that they're like, well, the way they put it is they never leave Paris. But if they do, and this is just endemic, I mean, this of like how French media works, like they don't, like, a writer doesn't take an assignment unless basically like the syndicat has essentially agreed to and usually paid for that article in some way.
Yeah, there's a lot that we could talk about in terms of the ethics of certain French journalistic standards, press trips, but also just sort of a lack of really going the extra mile. But I think part of that has to do with how poorly they're paid. But you're right. It's a different way of functioning.
I mean, all the way up to, I mean, the example I always use, like, I mean, you don't run a story about Macron without clearing quotes with the Elysee.
Oh, well, yeah, that's again.
So,
yes.
I mean, this is there's a whole lot of liberté except for the parts where there aren't. So, I mean,
it's too reverential.
Yeah. If there is positive response, that is great. But I can understand where there is there would be reasonable frustration. The vignerons who have read it or have seen it are generally, they're happy. It was interesting, even on this trip, they tend to like, they don't really care about the narrative book, which of course is the one that I put all the work into. They're curious to look through the producers and see who else is there, because that intense sense of belonging that the French have, and the sense of kind of clubbiness and affiliation, and having to see if you're like in the right crowd. So like all they care about is like, not even what I said about them, but like who else is there, and like were they featured with the right people. But look, there are also people like, I'm thinking of like Yvon Massonat, who has Domaine Balargus in the Loire, was very kind to invite me as the speaker to the Palais d'Anjou this summer. And he gets it. I mean, he has done a lot of this research, but I think it's the people, it's the vigneron who I think have fought that fight, and who realize that they are not alone. And I think, seeing that there is this framework that explains all of the pain they've endured, like they like it. So that actually is fulfilling to me, because
right, and you're recognizing them.
Yeah. I mean, they feel seen.
Right. So I have two final questions, and I hope we can get to them before we can open it up. I can't overlook the passage on natural wine, because we are living in this moment in the last 8 to 10 years where it has just exploded alongside bistronomy, which is, the food movement that has really, really shifted the dining landscape in Paris. And you and I regularly discuss this, but I like it's funny, what you call the culture around natural wine, you call it sandbox insularity. And I think that merits a bit of discussion. What do you mean by that?
So that's a really good follow-on to what I was just saying.
Exactly.
Which is that there is this innate French desire and tendency to want to belong. And there is, I think probably, or perhaps because of laïcité, so if you take away kind of one identifying principle, which is your religion, people will look for other ways to identify. And so what's your sports team? What trade union are you part of? Like, which, I mean, I don't know, pick it.
Those are two good examples. Yeah.
But so there is this very strong sense of, I was going to say inclusivity, but it's not inclusivity.
No.
Of affiliation.
Okay.
And so one of the ways that I went at natural wine, and that was for sure the hardest chapter to write, because it's not because of the writing, but because it took me so long to find the right analogies, and to dump things like, oh, it's just punk, which it's not. I mean, it's maybe in a little way, but actually it's a really bad analogy. And I ended up talking a lot about modern art and the Refusé and the Salon de Refusé, and that kind of gave me a framework. And again, the way that that you are completely an outcast and unacceptable in French culture until one day you are beloved, and then it's always been that way. And yes, of course, Manet and Van Gogh and Monet were geniuses, and we always knew that, except for the part where the Académie des Beaux-Arts basically just kicked them to the curb for 30 years.
So natural wine is that.
So natural wine is very much that. But the thing is that it is in part the inability for natural wine to be given a seat at the table. But it's also, and this was my point, it's the inability of natural winemakers to understand the ways in which they have transformed the system, because they are so into hanging out with each other and like smoking their cigarettes, outside in the cold, and just like broing down, that they can't actually see the ways in which there is a larger world that's willing to engage with them, because there's a weird persecution complex. So it's that they're like, they sort of, there is this need for belonging and to be,
and they align themselves with other natural winemakers,
but only certain natural winemakers. And I'll spare the long example of Domaine Weinbach in Alsace, because I know we have more questions, but it's not just like oh, well, these are these are the rules you have to follow, even though, yes, in 2019 there was an approved syndicat for natural wine, and there is a van méthode nature, I think, designation that the INAO now controls, to the point of like everyone ends up as part of the establishment, and ends up like following the rules in the end, but which is bizarre for a movement that's supposed to have no rules. But no, it's not, oh, everyone, it's not at all inclusive. It's very much like, do you like, hang out, and do you listen to MC Solar and all the vintage hip hop, and like, are you,
Where's Stussy? Because
yeah,
that's coming back
exactly,
too.
yeah, do you have, like, are we bros or not? So that would be the quote unquote sandbox insularity.
Well, there's lots more to unpack about natural wine. You'll just have to read that chapter. But I'd like to conclude before we open it up with something. We've just spent this time talking about the new France and what is the new French wine. What do we do though with the old France that everyone knows and apparently loves?
Burn it to the ground. No, I mean, so this goes very much back to your question about myth, and what's interesting about the new French wine, but honestly the new French everything, is that when it exists in its best form, it is entirely an evolution of what has come before, which is to say, we could pull sort of nearly any of the wines in the book out, and I could give you a very detailed explanation on why it is simply the progression from a wine and a culture and a tradition that existed 50 years ago or 100 years ago or 150 years ago. And it's one reason that in the first chapter of the book, I highlight 3 key viticultural texts from the 19th century, which like Jules Guyot, who was one of the most famous ampelographers and wine researchers, and sort of everything researchers of his day, kind of did what I did, but even more detail. He spent like 7 years compiling a 3-volume book about like every single wine tradition in France. And so whether it's that, whether it's gastronomy, whether it's art, like the thing that I am optimistic about is that all of these things that come are not net new. They are very much built on the best of French tradition, and to the point of myth and the way that people get mired in this. My example to you before was Midnight in Paris, which I like a lot as a movie, but is literally just kind of like bathing in the worst cliches about how Americans believe in France. Is that, like, there's nothing wrong with embracing the new by seeing how it is moved on from the old, but it is also acknowledging that the old is just that, it's old. And if you don't see the ways that things move on, then you enter very dangerous territory. Like, say, if you want to, I don't know, make America great again.
I knew you were going to say that. So yeah, we don't want to keep France great again. We want to keep it evolving. Jon, thank you so much. I'm sure people have questions, so please have at it.
Curious about your research, because you did 6 weeks of research for every 3-week trip. How much of the boots on the ground 3 weeks did you allow for, like, pivoting if you end up somewhere and they're like, oh, this guy you should see, or this winemaker, you should taste what they're doing because it's different, and they're pushing down. How much of it is fluid?
And I should say, like, sometimes it was 6 weeks, sometimes it was 4, but it was over time, I learned to start baking in more time to my schedule, to do what I call reporting by walking around, which is, say, sometimes it was like, you should go see this guy, you should go see this woman. And so I would bake a little bit more time in for that, just knowing that I had to, leave space for the things that would come along. But it was also, even if it wasn't filled with that, it was like just driving around and like going to find vineyards that someone had told me about, or driving into, you know, some little town that just, you know, I was curious about, and you know, picking up sort of the gestalt. I mean, and that actually I think is where a lot of the best material in the book came from, was the time that I spent alone. Not that the winemakers who I visited, which was probably around 650 of them, were incredibly generous with their time, were gracious, you know, I mean, just, you know, really remarkable, you know, invited me to their tables a couple times, you know, had me stay at their houses, whatever. But like, so all of that was incredibly valuable, but a lot of it was just spending that time kind of bumping around, looking at what was going on, you know, taking an afternoon in Alsace to drive to the town of Munster, because I always loved like real Munster, not the fake American Munster, but like I was just like, I want to see this town. And, you know, and discovered that for some reason that the town of Munster is overrun by Germans all the time. Yeah, it was, I think I started being a little over programmed, and by the end I left more time in. I also found I had to go back to a lot of places more than I thought. I went back to the Loire 6 times. I went back to Bordeaux 3 times, I think, 3 or 4. I went back to Beaujolais probably 5 times. And so one reason it took a long time was not even like I have to go see this person, I have to go see this person, but just feeling like I hadn't quite gotten the story I needed to get.
Yeah, let me ask, if you don't mind asking to the microphone so everyone online can hear as well.
Did you have any vintners that like shut you out, you know, and did
Like-
you try to pursue it if they did?
Like, who wouldn't see me?
Yeah.
A handful. There were a few, very few, who were just like, I'm too small, I don't produce enough wine. I would get a little annoyed with that, and eventually over time I realized that was usually a pretty honest response. There were, I mean, really only a handful who were actively resistant to seeing me. And so for the most part, I think I didn't put them in the book, and occasionally did so vindictively. I'm thinking of Costerie in Burgundy, where, I mean, this was not for lack of trying. The guy who sort of manages the office of their American importer, and they're known for being difficult, tried, I think, 6 times. You have to fax them because they can't like pick up the phone or respond to an email. So he tried, I think, 6 times to explain who I was, and here's the thing, and you know, Jon is really very respected, and he's comes respectfully, and you know, it's like I don't need to taste the wine. I just like I want to talk to them. And they finally, their final answer was that they were not receiving any new journalists. They would only speak to journalists they had spoken to before. So screw them. I put their cousin in. But I was like, look, Romane Conti was happy to see me. Chateau Rayas, which is notoriously the most difficult address to get into in all of France. Like Emmanuel Renault was happy to see me. Like, you know, had to like ask the right way. And, you know, like I have a long-standing friendship with his American importer, and she is French, and she, you know, explained who I was. You know, like Chateau Margaux, Chateau Lafleur, Chateau like Petrus. It's like, okay, well, if Petrus is willing to see me and they don't see anybody, and Chateau Ras is willing to see me, and you think like, I don't know, I'm some jackass who's not, you know, not worth your time. Okay. So it really did not happen very often. I found 99% of the time that, again, vignerons were, you know, not only happy to see me, but were incredibly generous with their time, incredibly generous with their knowledge, with really taking the time to have a visitor. And it was fascinating to me. They would, you know, again, this cliquishness, they were trying to sort of figure out where on the spectrum I was. So they would be like, so the book's just about natural wine. No, it's not just about natural wine. But they kept asking me what I did, and I would explain, and they say, oh, so you're a journaliste indépendant. And I would get sort of offended at first, because I was like, well, no, I was the wine editor of the San Francisco Chronicle for 10 years. I was Decanter's columnist. I have
That means nothing to them.
yeah, I know. you know, well, more importantly, whatever, you know, I didn't write for Revue de Vin de France, which probably was more valuable, but I wasn't Robert Parker. So, but it became clear over time that that wasn't actually dismissive. What they meant was that I wasn't actually affiliated with the publications that for them are sort of part of this entrenched system where everyone's on the take. So it became, I won't say like surprisingly easy, but over time I found a groove where it was really not hard to go see the people I wanted to see.
Looking ahead to the future, are you optimistic about French wine in general, or any particular region that really excites you?
I am hugely optimistic about it. I think the rate of change is probably even faster now than it was when I started this project. And I think that now a lot of vignerons in a lot of regions are seeing that progress is in fact their future, and more specifically that and we didn't even really talk about this, but that this to me is the first time in history that French wine is really moving to be based on quality and not quantity, and that is a tremendous change in terms of the agricultural economy. So you know, it takes place in different ways, but I think the momentum just keeps growing. In terms of regions, I mean, most of them, but to give you a few, Champagne, I'm astonished at how fast things are moving, which is to say, like literally every week, I'm finding a couple new, like usually kids of established properties in their 20s who like, you know, they've studied, and they see now that instead of selling their grapes to LVMH, they can make their own wine, specific, very sort of single village, single parcel, and frankly, like be more distinctive, make their own name for themselves, make more money. Burgundy, very much the same, with a new generation, but again, also like all these micro negos who are showing up. Beaujolais transforming itself into kind of the new Burgundy that we can actually afford to drink. Roussillon, where they're like 20 years ahead of almost anyone in France in understanding how to farm for climate change, and how to take these, again, very old vineyards. You go to Bagnols, these are like 100-year-old Grenache vines, to speak about old France, and they're transforming from Bagnols as we know it, which was a fortified wine, to these fresh, engaging, dry wines that are grown literally in the same vineyards that for the most part are still half abandoned. So it's, I mean, you know, it's frustrating because I have an ever-growing list of notes of things that I have to update. But at the same time, it's thrilling to see that, I mean, I can't keep up. I don't think anyone can keep up with how fast the transformation is taking place.
We've got a question
Well,
in the back.
well, I
here.
want to pick up on some of that. In fact, you finally mentioned the words climate change, the degree to which this is entering into the thinking, you know, of a lot of French winemakers, because it gets a lot of discussion, especially on the television every time, you know, some incredible weather system hits the wine growing regions. I mean, it's almost like a natural or a national catastrophe, you know, and watching people, you know, at various times during critical parts of the wine or the grape growing season, putting out their pots, or, you know, trying to keep the vines from suffering too much from late frost. How much are people, and I'm talking about the winemakers as opposed to the conglomerates that may be behind some of them, thinking about how they may have to actually physically move to try to create or to maintain some of these wine varieties, and maybe in different locations? You know, where are they going to find the microclimates and all the rest of it down the road? Is that factoring into their thinking?
So interestingly, that this takes us back to myth versus reality again. There is, you know, unfortunately, just to keep beating up on the media, there is a lot of bad reporting around the way that climate change is impacting French wine in particular, since that's what we're talking about. You know, like Champagne is going to have to move to Belgium or Denmark, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a couple pieces of this. There is something drastic in that within the past 10 years, French viticulture, other parts of agriculture, but viticulture has moved from a historic, meaning 1,000-year deficit of sunlight to a surplus. So suddenly, if you're in France, that means you can't farm the way you used to when you're in very northern Europe, and you would never get things ripe and you'd have to chaptalize, meaning adding sugar. Now you suddenly have to figure out how to make sure things don't ripen too fast. That is a complicated thing, but it is, again, like the Roussillon, like it is something that can be figured out. Grape growing is not actually that hard. I mean, vines are basically weeds. So getting really good grapes is a little harder, but like this isn't like growing orchids. So all of those things are doable. The more complicated part is late season frost, to your point. And that is one where I think there is a lot of struggle around how do you delay budding of vines? How do you shift the maturing cycle? How do you have more vegetative growth early on and delay the reproductive cycle, which is when vines move from growing leaves to growing grapes, since grapes ultimately are how they think that they're going to reproduce. Jokes on them. But the scare tactics that are there are frustrating. Fred Meunier is like, well, we're gonna have to grow Syrah and Burgundy in 25 years because we can't grow Pinot Noir anymore. No, they'll figure it out. Maybe the northeast facing sites in Chambol will be the great sites. There's lots of ways that things can evolve and things can be maintained. And again, the importance of patrimoine is really there. And so I don't actually worry that much about that piece. I think it will get solved. It's just actually realizing that you have to move away from sort of the drama to thinking about the ways that other regions, like say California, have frankly dealt with this. That said, there will be changes. I mean, it's very clear now, not because of me, but because of academic research in Bordeaux, that you probably won't be able to grow Merlot on the right bank in 30 years. That said, Merlot was not the dominant grape on the right bank until the 1950s. It was Cabernet Franc and Malbec. So, worst case, they have to go back to the way they did things in the 1870s. So again, it's, things will evolve, but wine is really low on my list of things I worry about when I worry about climate change.
On that note, thank you very much.